First off, I want to thank everybody in attendance. Thank you so much for coming. And but mainly, I'd like to thank Hillary Hedges Rayport on behalf of the library and myself for coming to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Dakota, for coming up with the idea to just talk with people. And I was very surprised that you wanted to talk with me, but very honored. And thank you, everyone, for coming down to hear the conversation.
Perfect. In a few words, can you tell people who may not be familiar with you a little bit about yourself and your ties to Nantucket?
Oh, sure. I'm a mom, and I have my son Milo here in the audience. I think of myself as a reformed capitalist.
Okay, I like that. That's a good answer.
I love gardening. I love learning how to do things. I love understanding and learning new things. I worked really, really hard to not have ties to Nantucket, to tell you the truth. The ties come through my mother-in-law, Shirley, who's in the front row. Shirley is, can I say it, Cheryl? Shirley is 100 years old.
Wow, that's amazing.
And she discovered Nantucket in the 1950s, the early 1950s, when she came for a bike tour.
Wow.
And she wasn't married to her husband at that time, but he independently discovered Nantucket when he came for art lessons.
Oh.
And then they both decided to become students of neurology and neuroscience together. And Shirley's a neuropsychiatrist, and Mark was a neurosurgeon, and they collaborated on the study of epilepsy. But Nantucket was always the place that they came to relax, and they came here every summer. It was their vacation spot. And my husband grew up coming here. So when we were married and we live in Boston when we're not here, and it came time where we thought, maybe we should fulfill Shirley and Mark's dream of finally owning a home on Nantucket, and maybe we should have a place, to relax and a second place. I really tried to not have it be Nantucket. It's hard to get to. It's poor value for money. But we just kept coming here, and I just kept looking around, and there's just no place like Nantucket. There is no place. It is exceptional and precious. And the more time I spent here, the more time I realized we have to be here. And so we ended up buying a very old house. The oldest part is 1748, and it's actually completely intact inside. It has a preservation restriction on it, on the interior, and it's super livable. Every surface has just layers and layers of the past imbued in it. And I was working. I was a financial consultant, an investor. My husband teaches at Harvard Business School. We were really busy. We had our kids. We were going back and forth. And then life just sort of led us to have more and more time here. And I think Nantucket actually does something to you. I think it gets into you. And then if you have the time and if you listen, you feel like you have to give back to it. You have to do something, because the only reason why this place is here is through an economic accident, both prosperity and depression, and then because people cared. People really, really cared about having it be a different place, a world apart. And so now I guess I would describe myself, as an accidental activist. I didn't really set out to be an activist, but I am an activist for preservation, for good governance, for citizen participation, and those are my ties to Nantucket.
It's an excellent answer. Can you talk a little bit about your upbringing?
My upbringing, oh my God, you don't want to hear about that.
A little bit about you.
Another accident of nature, no. Well, I'm from Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, and I think of myself as a self-made person, but the truth is none of us are self-made. My father was a lot older. He was born in 1921. So he was like an older dad when I was born, and my mother had like a very itinerant lifestyle. But other than that, we lived in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, and I guess I would say lessons from growing up: don't give up, and be who you are. You just have to be who you are. You can't apologize. You have to speak your truth. And I think I learned that from like observing a lot of situations where that wasn't the case, and it really doesn't work out so well over time. So I'm really grateful to especially to my mother for what she sacrificed for my education. She had to make a lot of sacrifices to make sure that they always put my education first. And for me, that was a really good path. I'm really blessed to have been able to go to really fine schools. I put myself through schools. I always had a job from the time I was 14. But I had parents who sacrificed for me and loved me, so I'm grateful to them.
You were an English major, correct?
I was, yeah. In college, I was an English major.
Your thesis was on Moby Dick?
My thesis was on Herman Melville, Typee, and Moby Dick, actually, and I got a little bit of Montaigne in there, too.
So you kind of already had an early connection to Nantucket to some degree.
I did, yeah. I first came here in 1991.
Okay.
We stopped in New Bedford to see the Seaman's Bethel, which, plays prominently in Moby Dick. But yeah.
Did you, after leaving Princeton with an English major, when did you realize you wanted to have a career? When did you decide to go for an MBA? Did you already have that in mind, or was it just kind of, when did you decide to have that career in the business?
Did I have that in mind from the beginning? I mean, I think I had my college career, I was sort of choosing between a scientific path. I was really interested in nature and the natural world. I took a year off in college, which I highly recommend to anybody. I think the world rushes by, and you have to recognize that some things only happen once, and you don't want to mess them up. And I felt after my first 2 years, where I spent the first year of college following the Grateful Dead, that I was messing it up. And I had to really care about whatever I was going to study. So I took a year off, and I decided to explore the environmental field. I worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service on Assateague Island off the coast of Virginia. I worked for the World Center for Birds of Prey. I lived on the side of a mountain in Oregon, looking after peregrine falcons. I worked delivering pizzas. I worked as a kosher chef in a kosher vegetarian restaurant in Minnesota. I did a bunch of different things. But I did decide that, like, the birding and all of that is more of a hobby for me. I didn't feel like it was going to be interactive enough and challenging enough. I liked the interaction. So when I came back to school, I decided, all right, I'm not going to do environmental studies. I'm going to focus on literature, which I love because I love stories. And I felt like if you read enough, you can live through other people's mistakes, so then maybe you can avoid making them on your own.
Okay, I like that. Interesting.
But your question was about the MBA. So, I didn't inherit money. I had to make it. So my father was a lawyer turned failed businessman. Sorry, Dad. But, we have to accept that it's true. So I was just interested in entrepreneurism. I ran a small business in college.
What was it?
Oh, it was the Facebook, not the Facebook.
So, wow, that's such a tiny business.
Facebook. I was too early. Yeah, I published and sold the paper Facebook for Princeton's freshman class.
Really?
Yeah, and it was really cool because it was at the beginning of desktop publishing, so I had to make all the decisions, so I could decide to like hire this firm in Kansas City to, well, they were going to publish it, but they could also lay it out, and I decided I was going to lay it out myself.
Oh, okay.
So I had to learn like, I don't know what it was, PageMaker or something, some Adobe program at the time. And nobody had a personal computer. And I, at the time, was also exploring an interest in farming. So I was working on an organic farm in central Massachusetts and laying out this book for the incoming class of 1,100 students. And I had to like drive back to use the computers in the computer lab. Anyway, so that's the business I ran. And it really helped. And actually, it was various things that I was able to do with that silly little business that got me hired in a very interesting job when I graduated. Because I was able to talk about my year off, which people found really interesting. So another reason to take a year off. But I was also able, like I built a database of mailing addresses so that I could send direct mail to everybody in the university who might buy one of these books.
Oh, I love
and
that.
then I had a cost of goods for my books that I printed, but all of the other books from the prior freshman classes that were they were currently sophomores, juniors, or seniors, I just got those. I didn't have to buy them. So I thought if I sell a lot of these books that I made before, then I'll make more profit.
Yeah.
So I built this database and I did a direct mail piece to like get other people to buy the books. And then I got a call from the New York Times and they said, somebody told us that they must have called me at home because we didn't have cell phones. So I'm at my home with my parents in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, and the New York Times said, how much do you want for your database?
Oh my God.
And I think I sold it to them for $250.
Really? Who do you think
Which
won
was
that
probably
deal?
completely illegal because, of course, I transcribed it from private sources within the university.
Yeah.
But anyway, I guess I thought that was pretty cool, in that being in technology. So my first job was as a venture capital investor in technology companies in the early 90s, and it was fascinating.
After graduating with an MBA, before even that, I had seen, I don't know if it's true, but were you part of the motorcycling club?
Oh my God, where did you come up with this?
Did you?
Yes, I have owned 2 motorcycles.
Wow.
And I'm starting to feel really uncomfortable talking about myself. Can I ask you some questions, Dakota?
Go ahead. What's it? That's pretty interesting. I think that's a very interesting thing. Being a part of the motorcycling club, that's pretty cool.
I mean, the motorcycling club at Harvard Business School was like me and my friends who had motorcycles, and we would just ride around. We did organize a safety class.
Okay.
And if you took the safety class, you ended up with a motorcycling license. So we organized it so all the students could do. When you're in business school, you just kind of move around in packs. People just like move around in packs. So.
After you left business school, did you kind of have an idea of where you wanted to go in the world of business, or was it just?
I really didn't. None of the banks wanted to hire me because I hadn't demonstrated interest in banking. I don't think I could really crunch through the case analyses the way the consulting firms wanted you to, and they're just, I don't know, it's like, okay, you can go into banking or you can go into consulting, and that's kind of where career services pointed you if you were interested in business. So I was really, really lucky to find this job that it was a firm that had a model that they wanted young people who could go out there and find businesses for them. So, so I really fell into it. It was fortunate.
And how long were you there for?
Let's see, I was there for 4 years. It was like a 3-year position, and I stayed for an extra year. And I was just, at that point, I was just following the path. You do this, you go to business school. So there wasn't.
Because you had gone from like you worked for venture capitalists, you did, you're an executive for a data analytics company, is that correct? I might be a little
Yeah,
off on that.
after I graduated from business school, I moved to London, and I worked in investing in London, and then I was sort of with my husband, and he was here, so I figured out how to come back here, and I was in New York, and then I was living 5 blocks from the World Trade Center.
Oh, wow.
In 2001, and anyway, the world, like the investment world fell apart, the physical world fell apart, like it was very dark days, and I was very grateful that I could move to Boston and married an incredible man named Jeffrey Rayport with an incredible mother-in-law named Shirley, and
an incredible kid. There you go.
2 incredible kids and friend. What was your question again? Was
You had gone from venture to
the
capitalist to
data
executive.
analytics.
Yeah, data
Yeah,
analytics,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
you went to, I think,
Yeah.
investment consulting
Yeah.
towards the end of your career.
Yeah, I joined a firm called Sitel Software, and I have to say that's one of the things I've done that I'm most proud of.
Really?
They were 2 brilliant academics who had figured out how to automate exact statistics, which is a branch of statistics with extremely complicated equations, and they used desktop software to make it much easier to make valid statistical conclusions of very, very small samples. So it was kind of tailored for the pharmaceutical industry, but it was a small market the way they were doing it, and they hired me when I just moved to Boston. I was kind of looking around for something to do, and they hired me to do a business plan for them. So we ended up deciding together to focus on clinical trial design. And now they were bought. It was very successful. They were bought by a private equity firm and then bought by another private equity firm. But they still have an independent identity. I was actually just looking at their website recently and just feeling very much like, I'm not mentioned anywhere here, but I really felt like I help them pivot to an area that made a big difference for the world. Being able to run clinical trials more efficiently saves lives and makes drug development more efficient. So I was very proud of that.
It's amazing to hear.
Yeah.
You went afterwards into, what was it, investment consultant?
Yeah, then I needed a mommy job. So that was a good mommy job, very predictable. I worked with big investment committees. So I worked at big museums and foundations, and I would lead their investment committee discussions and make recommendations and build portfolios for them.
And then somewhere either during that time or maybe after or before, you tell me you kind of fell in love with gardening, as you
I've
previously
always
mentioned.
been in love with
Is that just
gardening.
a lifetime passion?
I've always been in love with gardening.
Really? Where did it start?
I love flowers. Probably my mother. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, she was always buying pansies and never planting them, and so they would just sit and like wilt in their pots. But it was always this aspirational thing, to be able to grow. And she's really into organic gardening. So, when we never had any sun at our house, so we would have a garden at some neighbors, and it was always a big thing to do together, like go get the manure and figure out how to do it organically. And I love growing things. But you have to learn to let go when you're a gardener. I mean, stuff gets eaten, you can't get too attached.
It's a good life lesson.
Yeah, you have to recognize it's just a plant, like it'll be okay.
I heard you have an amazing garden on the island.
Well, this year the deer, I don't know, has anybody else had deer-ish? Yeah, the deer have been really, and the bunnies, very bad.
Did you still love, what is it, Italian freeform gardens?
Oh my God, that was such, what? My friend Rachel here produced that story. She was the editor of Boston Magazine, and she sent a photographer to her garden with and a woman who knew nothing about gardening to write the story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was like,
yeah.
I don't know much about that, but
yeah, no, it was actually misquoted, but that's okay.
What's your favorite kind of garden then?
I really like English gardens, so that's where they kind of reversed it.
So close.
Yeah, Italian gardens are not free form. They're very, I'm sure there are different kinds of Italian gardens, but anyway.
So your favorite is an English garden?
Yeah, I like the English, like the blousy, natural, exuberant.
What's your favorite type of flora or anything for your garden?
Oh my God, my favorite type of flora?
Yeah.
I have a really hard time with these favorite questions.
Ooh.
I really do.
What's in right now for you?
What?
What's in right now for you? Right now, what do you enjoy?
Oh, well, like I said, I had a really hard time with the garden. I would say I have a clematis. It's a type of clematis called an integrifolia, which doesn't actually climb. It just sort of flops around. So it's a vine that just doesn't climb. It like just flops.
Okay.
But it blooms all summer long. And so it's just sort of going and going, and nothing's been eating it. So that's been good, yeah. And I had some dahlias. I've stopped trying to start my own dahlias. I buy them at Surfing Hydrangea.
I had heard that you had, I'm not sure if it's accurate, but you had like some type of a setup for apple trees, or like they.
Oh, we have a spot. So our garden, if you want to talk a little bit about our garden, which is in town, I can't take credit for designing the garden, nor would I have ever had the wherewithal or the vision to create this garden. It was designed by Lucinda Young, by the prior owner of our home, who, you know, he just had a very deep connection to design and aesthetic on Nantucket. And Lucinda Young is, she's the sister of Robert and Harvey Young, and she's an artist, you know. She was passionate about native plants. My garden is not a native garden, but it has a lot of her signature elements, and one of them are these espaliered crab apples.
Yeah. It sounds very, very beautiful.
But I hope we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing.
Yeah, we got plenty of time. Don't worry. Look, there's plenty of time. So after a bit of your business career, you got really into, or maybe even during, you got really into preservation, and it's kind of become something that you're incredibly passionate about, especially on Nantucket. Can you tell me a little bit about where that started?
I would be glad to. So, like I describe myself as an accidental activist. So, what happened was, you know, our home is on Main Street. It's on the cobblestones, and we got a notice. Everybody on our block got a notice through the mail saying, you know, this is the Nantucket Department of Public Works, and we're going to be reconstructing Main Street, and we'd like to have a community meeting, you know, to talk with you all about your interest in the street and what we're going to do and everything. And what we heard was that they purchased all new curbs for the street, that the street was going to be reconstructed, the cobblestones were going to be taken up, there was going to be a asphalt street put down with the cobblestones put on top, and that this was necessary because the truck traffic, etc., was you know, going to be a problem, and they just needed to make this repair. And we were all like completely shocked. I mean, this street, like we happen to live on the street, we don't own the street, you know, we don't own the sidewalks, but we have, you know, we were invested, and we were abutters. So we just got very concerned, and we thought, all right, well, this is our chance to say what we like about the street, what's important. And I put together, you know, like a 10-page leaflet with photos, kind of documenting the things that we liked about the street, recognizing and welcoming that the street was I mean, not the street so much, the street was inconvenient. The sidewalks continue to be dangerous. You know, there was like, thank you very much. And I thought, I just need to pay a lot more attention to this. And it was one of the things that was very rewarding was all the conversations with the neighbors. You know, the people in the neighborhood, we all, you know, it is not easy to maintain what you see on Main Street. And everybody who is doing that because they're doing it for the community. You know, I mean, it's an obligation. So we felt the street, you know, doubly so. And I just thought, I need to pay more attention to this. I need to understand what's going on. And so I thought, you know, it was unfolding slowly. I thought, I'm going to go to the next public meeting was in January. And at this point, you know, we have kids, we live in Boston. Our kids go to school in Boston. And I thought, I'm gonna come down and go to this meeting. So I went to this meeting. It was on January 10th at the community room at the Fort Fairgrounds Public Safety Building. And I didn't know a lot of people at that point. This was in 2018, and the room was full. I mean, it was a joint meeting of the HDC and, you know, I guess it was a public information session sponsored by the DPW, and the HDC was there as a quorum because they were concerned about the street. And the question was, does the HDC actually have the ability to issue a certificate of appropriateness for this work on the street? And at this point, one of the things that we in the neighborhood were very concerned about was, for instance, I mean, in addition to the curbs, but think about these granite slab crosswalks that go across the street. They're part of the texture of the street. You look at them and you think, huh, what is that? Why is it here? You know, it's not a modern crosswalk. Obviously, it's not I mean, it is a crosswalk, but it's not what we consider an accessible crosswalk. It's not an accessible crosswalk, but it's interesting. You know, it is something that gives you pause, that makes you ask a question. You have to wonder, well, where did these materials came here when we didn't have power tools? Like, how did they get them here? How did they shape them? Why did they do it? Who used them? I mean, there's just so many questions that are prompted by the little things that we observe in our physical environment. And the view was these crosswalks are not compliant and they need to be removed. That was the starting point. So that's kind of where we started. And I left that meeting just thinking, like, where are the preservation engineers? Where are the landscape architects? You know, why, like, we need to bring, and can it really be true that a cobblestone street cannot support truck traffic? So it's just a non-starter to think that we could maintain this street in a traditional way. Like, is the underlying premise, does that like hold up to scrutiny? And so I had just a fascinating February. I read every article about cobblestones that was in the Inquirer and Mirror. You can get through this wonderful, amazing library, which I just stopped being a trustee of after 6 years. I hit my term limit. Made an investment to make to scan and digitize and make searchable all of the historic newspapers of Nantucket going back to the 18th century. So you can read any topic you want to know about. You can come and find the newspaper archive, and you can find out what people thought 100 years ago about it. And I guarantee you, people had something to say about it 100 years, whatever the topic is. And so I just read like everything, and I put together this whole timeline. And it was such a fascinating topic because it intersected with sanitation, sewer lines, water lines, the trees, the whole story of planting the trees, and then the terror about what was happening to the trees in the 30s and 40s, and this fear of the Dutch elm disease. There were so many incredible stories in the paper. And the thing that really got me was not just everything that could be known, it was like time travel. It was like going back and walking in the steps and seeing the environment that I knew through the eyes of the people who lived then, because these were all contemporary accounts. And what I discovered was that this story of the cobblestone road had been fought before. And that when it's actually called bituminous concrete. When bituminous concrete became a thing and widely available, the town was pretty excited about it. And they wanted to concrete, it was called, all of Upper Main Street, from the Pacific Blank all the way up. And it was actually a bunch of summer residents and the Civic League and the ladies of the Civic League that marched down in February in 1919 to a select board meeting with $2,300 and said, we will pay to cobblestone the street. Please don't cover it with concrete. And that was sort of, you know, a group of people can make a difference. And then I think about just all the living history that we enjoy. And it is because some people decided and had the courage of their conviction and also did something about it. They had to raise the money. And the town said, well, fine, if you're going to pay for it, you can use our tools. But then they had to find somebody to lay the cobblestones. And anyway, this is kind of a long story, but I will summarize the saga of cobblestones on Nantucket as saying that it was an available technology to make the streets safe and more permanent that was born of, history back to the Roman age. And when we saved this street, but a lot of like Liberty Street was cobblestone, Orange Street was cobblestone, Water Street was, South Beach Street was cobblestone, Water Street, we had cobblestones everywhere. And then when the concrete came in, that know-how went away. It became a lost art. So the streets that were left had been very well constructed, and it was actually a team from, I think, Brockton that the ladies in 1919 hired to do Main Street. But it was very well built, but when it started to fall apart, there was nobody who knew how to fix it. And there was a commissioner of the water company who dug up Main Street to put in the water line and said, I'm not going to put this street back together until we figure out how to do it right. And so there's some stories about how they got an expert paver, the paver never got on the ferry, they never showed up. But then what you see is that a man named Antone Sylvia became the head of this cobblestone group. And he worked for the company called John Ring Company, that was the firm that had been in the cobblestone business, but then got all into the concreting business. So my personal theory is that the town said, the water company commissioner said, look, we've made you rich with all this concreting business. You need to figure out how to fix this road. And Antone Sylvia came from the Azore Islands, where they have cobblestones everywhere, and they had a history of whaling as well. And he joined up with an Irishman, and where also there are a lot of, he was a wash ashore, and there were a lot of cobblestone streets, obviously, and they became this unit of the DPW who knew how to build cobblestone roads. And then you had this sort of renaissance of interest in the cobblestones and maintaining them, to the point where in the 1970s there was a big push, in part because of the petroleum crisis and the movement for conservation and preservation generally, especially on Nantucket, the preservation movement being very strong from 1950 to 1975, to expand the cobblestones. So this street, which is now known as India Street and then was then known as Pearl Street, was more recently returned to cobblestones.
And Antone Sylvia, isn't he the great grandfather maybe of?
He is the great grandfather of John Sylvia. So when you go to the Four Winds gift shop or in the Pacific Club and you see John Sylvia, you can thank him for the work his grandfather did. And
you have a vast knowledge. I've never learned more about from Hillary herself. She has, I can't remember the other names that contributed to the case study or the article about flagstones, Belgian blocks, curbstones, cobblestones. It was found it online by you and a few others. Yeah,
so I wrote this all up as an article called "A Cobblestone
Gathers No Moss."
Gathers No Moss. I tried to get so many people to publish it. Nobody wanted to publish it. I don't know if it was just like badly written or not broadly of interest.
I thought it was wonderfully written, I will say.
Thank you. But then our group on Main Street did find a preservation engineer who was an expert in cobblestone streets. He had won the Rome Prize. He had been a highway engineer who went back to school for preservation engineering. He won the Rome Prize, which is a year fellowship to study at the American Academy in Rome, where he studied traditional paving. He studied the Roman roads. So he came and spent a lot of time, and he spent a lot of time with the head of the DPW. And We he did it, at that point we had restarted the Historical Commission, so he did it for the Historical Commission and delivered it as a gift to the town, paid for by these private citizens. Those specifications have become part of the work that is being done on the sewer force main. So we really, I guess it's the other thing I'm really proud of. And secondly is just, there was a lot of education. You know, we totally changed the conversation by doing our homework, bringing good research, raising awareness on the issue, but also coming up with a solution. You know, like, look, we could do it a different way. And, you know, some people didn't like that. They don't like anybody having other ideas. One of the things that was very frustrating, there were people who said, Hillary, you have to let it be someone else. You know, you have to let other people think it's their idea. I'm like, can't I have ideas? Like, what, I'm not allowed to have ideas? They don't have to be I don't need to take the credit, but like, do I have to trick people into thinking it's their idea? That just seemed really dysfunctional to me. You know, everybody can have ideas. And just because it's your idea doesn't mean you're the one who's going to be able to make it happen. We need partnership. We need to help each other. And
So did that passion for preservation eventually lead you to the Nantucket Historical Commission?
Well, actually, it was an understanding of political systems. I shouldn't say political because that's such a loaded word. It was a rising awareness of how we in the United States legally understand and preserve historic artifacts in the physical environment. I mean, preservation is different from history, right? You're like identifying something that has history that through intention or accident happens to still exist and is something that can teach us something viscerally by being in its presence. And it's very different from reading about it in a book. The whole idea of the Historic Preservation Act is because the actual object that was there, that is original, it's been maintained. It's not all original, but it has integrity of having persisted. And you can go and be around it, you can put your hands on it. It's a different way of understanding and learning history. So that didn't always exist. You know, it started with the Revolutionary artifacts, battlefields, George Washington's house, Mount Vernon, George Washington headquarters, but then it became sort of more broadly interpreted to all sorts of cultural times, design. It doesn't have to be something beautiful. It can be something really ugly that was at its time a sign of something that was culturally significant and has persisted. So when I understood that, I realized that we weren't really going to be able to save these roads by arguing to have the HDC issue a COA, Certificate of Appropriateness, for them. We were going to save the roads because we could form a historical commission that could research and understand them and communicate that to other people and inspire them to want to save the roads. So there's a lot on Nantucket people feeling like, oh, well, you know, you're just you're not a regulatory commission, you're just an advisory commission. I think the advisory commissions are so much more important, because how do we make policy if we don't have good advice? How do we make policy? What do we base it on? We come up with regulations and those get to be enforced. But how do we evolve those regulations so they continue to be relevant, so they continue to take things that are important into account? You know, that comes to the advisory commissions, the policy, the commissions that inform policy.
And so that led you into becoming a part of the NHC.
Yeah, so we always had the ability to have a historical commission. I came across some folks that educated me, told me about that. I didn't know that. And then I thought, okay, well, this sounds right. This is what we should have on Nantucket. I went to Libby. And I said, I'd like to have your permission to restart the Historical Commission. And yeah, she probably regrets that she said yes, but she said, fine, we have, this is where the statute is, and this is what you need to do. And we got 9 people together and put our names in. We just applied. Nobody had applied for like 7 years, and then we got to work. We had to discover what a historical commission does. We didn't know what we were really supposed to do. So we took a lot of classes. We reached out to the Massachusetts Historical Commission for advice. We advocated for staff. The town didn't have a preservation planner when we started. And the more we learned about historical commissions, the more we thought, well, that's crazy. How can Nantucket not have a preservation planner? So we were really happy that Holly Backus applied for that job. She's passionate about the role. And yeah. And I decided to go back to school. So I'm now enrolled in a Master's of Preservation Studies just because I felt like you can't just expect people to go along with this. You need to be able to explain why it's important. So that's been a good decision. I mean, some of the classes, I'm taking a class in geographic information systems right now, which is like kind of brutal, but I'm glad I'm doing it. I guess some people, get to midlife and they want to buy like a fancy car, and I just decided to get another degree, so that's what I'm doing.
Right. That's an interesting way of going through like midlife crisis.
The midlife crisis, get another degree.
Yeah.
So.
Did you learn anything interesting being a part of the NHC, or kind of restarting, I guess, a historical commission on a town, especially Nantucket being so historical? Was there a lot of growing pains?
Yeah, it was difficult. It was difficult. I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's not a lot of trust. And were there growing pains? I mean, it was a great experience. And I think it was great for the community. I'm not a part of it anymore, but it's there and it's made a big difference. Every community, just about every community has a historical commission, so why shouldn't Nantucket? Yeah. And actually one of the most wonderful things was seeing how I don't need to be a part of it. I wasn't reappointed. That was disappointing. Yeah. Because I really did want to be appointed, and I thought that I deserved to be reappointed. But it's been so wonderful to see how they're going. It's a great group of people. And the person who took my spot is doing a fantastic job. So I can, and now I can do other things. I can be an activist. Yeah. I don't have to be like a commissioner. So there was painful, but it was great. I mean, if you don't do things that can be painful, then maybe you're not doing everything you can in life.
I don't want to use the word favorite, so we'll say, what is one of the historic landmarks on Island that you enjoy?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, my favorite place on Nantucket is Great Point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of Great Point, why not? What is the process like? I know you're involved in attempting to get the Great Point Lighthouse to become a historic landmark, because it's not available to be, because it's not over 50 years, yet there is some infrastructure issues.
Yeah.
What is the process like that you've learned in is it a large hurdle to overcome, or?
It's a very large hurdle. So the story with Great Point Light is that is it's not even a replica. It's kind of a reimagination of a lighthouse that blew over in, I haven't looked in a while, so I'm going to forget my dates, but
that's okay. It was 84.
It blew over in a nor'easter in 1983, or probably somebody here knows. I don't know.
Pretty sure it's,
do you know when Great
84.
Point? Priscilla, do you remember? What?
Yeah.
83. Thank you.
So you're right.
And, you know, it was a beloved lighthouse of many people, but especially the Kennedy family, who liked to sail out of sail Nantucket Sound. And Teddy Kennedy had been very involved with the Historic Lighthouse Act. So it wasn't just Great Point. He was into lighthouses, like, full stop. And there is a whole process for there's a whole process for transitioning historic lighthouses out of the government if the Coast Guard doesn't want to maintain them anymore, to let people maintain them. So that lighthouse got rebuilt, and they didn't try to replicate it. It had been a masonry lighthouse. The whole wall was made out of granite block. It knocked over, and they rebuilt it as it's actually a poured concrete, reinforced concrete lighthouse. And it has a rubble wall, which is just a veneer. And anyway, the wall has cracks. And it's looking pretty sad right now. And everybody wants that lighthouse fixed. So, you know, I thought, well, maybe the Historical Commission exists to advocate for historic objects, to recognize and nominate historic objects for listing on the National Register. But what I discovered, and I kind of, you know, I wasn't on the Historical Commission at this point, but I continued to work on it and talk to them, and they asked me to work on it. But what we found was that the lighthouse is not quite 50 years old. So that's it's not a firm line in the demarcation. I mean, there are some things that are not 50 years old that do get landmarked. But this is not, it doesn't meet the threshold. We felt like the association with Teddy Kennedy, I mean, he came to Nantucket, like there are photos of him on the lighthouse and everything, was enough to at least attempt to nominate it. It's not landmarking it, it's nominate it. The process is to talk to the state historical commission. We, Nantucket and the state, would nominate it to the Park Service. The Park Service would make the decision about whether or not it could be listed on the registry. Once it's listed on the registry, because it's federally owned, it cannot be demolished. It doesn't have to be maintained, but it would be eligible for grants to be able to maintain it. But the problem is, Nantucket can nominate, we can make nominations to the National Register, but we cannot nominate a federally owned structure. That can only be done by the Coast Guard. So now we're kind of back to just trying to use, trying to lobby, trying to influence, trying to get the Coast Guard to maintain it, trying to get our congressmen to maintain it. But it's not a historic structure. So actually, you asked me what my favorite historic structure was, and I said Great Point Light, and it's actually not a historic structure. So I guess I'll pick Brant Point Light.
We can go with Great Point anyways. Eventually, hopefully, in due time, it will be.
It's a favorite too. So yeah, I like lighthouses.
What's not to like about lighthouses?
Yeah. The other thing I love to do, that everybody should do if they don't do it already, is go to something natural, get a sandwich or a salad, and walk through Coffin Park and have a picnic in front of the oldest house.
And you can see a photo of back in the day when there was the hotel there. I forget what it's called at the top of my head, but it was right by where Coffin Park was, I think.
Oh, on that side.
Yeah,
I don't know which of the hotels that was.
Yeah, I can't remember the top of my head.
The
Thank you so much, the Sea Cliff, yep.
Enormous, yeah.
So we're coming a little bit up to my grand finale question, but beforehand I like to give it to kind of the same questions to each guest, quick fire, first thing off the top of your head. Are you interested?
Okay, do I get to have help from the audience?
Well, if you need it, sure.
Okay.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Never give up.
Good answer. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Oh my goodness. Charles Olmsted.
Okay.
Because he was successful later in life after many failed starts. He traveled throughout the South, documenting the plight of enslaved people, reported back to it, and then became Nantucket's most famous landscape architect. I think he'd be a fascinating person to sit down with.
What's one thing on your bucket list you haven't accomplished yet?
That I haven't accomplished? Protecting Great Point Light.
Perfect answer. If you had to pick one, what's your all-time favorite spot on the island and why? It could be your house also. Some people have chosen that.
Well, I mentioned Great Point.
Yeah.
I just think that's a really terrific spot. You know, the other place that I really love on Nantucket is Nantucket Harbor.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
It's a very good spot, especially during the sunset.
Yeah.
North Shore or South Shore beaches, I feel like I have an idea. If you like Nantucket Harbor, maybe North Shore, but who knows?
I couldn't choose between it depends on the day.
That's fair. What's your favorite way to unwind and relax after a long day?
I really love to talk with my husband. He's so interesting and challenging and encouraging. And if I didn't have a partner to, to talk with, I don't know, it'd just be a very, very different world.
It's a wonderful
I wouldn't
answer.
say that's a good way to relax because he could be, yeah. But that is a really, really important part of every day.
All right, we're on to the final question.
Okay.
It's the exact same question I ask every guest, and I still haven't memorized it, so I'm going to read it off to you. What do you envision for the future of Nantucket, considering its rich history, unique character, and the evolving challenge it faces? What are your thoughts on how the island can preserve its cultural heritage while embracing progress and addressing the needs of both residents and visitors?
Okay, so I'm an optimist.
Yep.
I think that things are going to get worse before they get better. I think we're going to have very real challenges to our infrastructure with the changing climate. But I think that there's going to be some inflection point where people get really serious. And I think we're going to, we need more progressive people. Like, we just need people that are progressive in their thinking, that are secure and not threatened all the time about, what if it's not my idea? And we're going to save this place. I think Nantucket will be different, but Nantucket is really still very, very special and worth saving. And I think the future is going to be bright if everybody just constantly tries to be a better person every day, better than you were yesterday. We're going to bring the world along with it.
You say it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. What are the things you're worried about before it gets better?
Well, we're losing historic structures, and there's really not an awareness that these things can't be rebuilt. I think we've really done a disservice by allowing replicas to be rebuilt all the time, and that the folks that are actually in charge of making sure the historic structures stay up don't understand how to evaluate them or why they're distinctive and can't be rebuilt. So, I think we need change, but, that's why we have elections. And education, and people can change their mind. So I think we're going to lose more historic structures. The thing that I feel should be changed and could be changed most through decisive near-term action is to clean up the harbor and bring back the scallop fishery. Scalloping, it's like, we all love the harbor, we deserve a clean harbor, and the harbor is not clean, it's polluted with nutrification. But the scallop fishery is important culturally, because scalloping as a way of life is part of what made Nantucket distinctive. Some of the things that made Nantucket distinctive were so many incredible people, skilled woodworkers and carpenters on Nantucket, and they'd be builders, and they would be scallopers in the winter. And it was like a lifestyle that allowed, you know, a community to exist here. And we've lost our scallop fishery, which means we've lost jobs. And we've allowed those jobs to be lost because we don't do the simple thing that we could do to enforce the limitations on fertilizer runoff. And I think we owe it to future generations to clean up our harbor, and we know what we need to do. So I think, you know, that's something we can do, and they're working on it. People are working on it. We just need to be a little bit more aggressive about it, I think.
Okay. So you said it earlier, but you're more optimistic than pessimistic. So I think that's 7 out of 7 so far we got for optimism. That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to add towards the end?
No, I mean, I'm really, like, I feel it's just, I've never had an experience like this with somebody wanting to have a conversation with me with people watching. So thank you all.
Okay.
I hope it was interesting.
I think it was incredibly interesting. Thank you so much, Hillary Hedges Rayport, for coming. Thank you to the audience. I appreciate it, everybody.